Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about commerce on chain. My name is Donald Raleigh, and I'm going to help facilitate the conversation today with Brandon and Jeremy Drane. Brandon Quittem is the head of marketing at Swan Bitcoin. Brandon says his superpower is distilling complex information to simple, actionable intelligence. Brandon grew up in a suburb near Minneapolis. His first business was selling soda pop to construction workers. Graduated with a business degree from the University of Minnesota after changing his major away from mechanical engineering. And as a student, he sold Cutco knives. I have Cutco knives, they're great. You were the vice president of his fraternity, and you ran the largest school newspaper in the country. He's a voracious learner, entrepreneur, educator, content marketer, strategic thinker, polymath inspired by hard problems, and a passion for Bitcoin. His personal interests include surfing, yoga, wilderness backpacking, traveling, and fungi. We're going to talk about fungi in just a few moments. Big fan. Currently, Brandon is building Swan Bitcoin, which is the best way to accumulate Bitcoin with automatic recurring buys and instant buys. Jeremy Drane goes by JD. He's a software engineer living in St. Paul, Minnesota, focus on decentralized technologies. Started when he co-founded PwC's first blockchain practice back in 2014. Afterwards, played a pivotal role in the creation and growth of, is it Luca?
It was Libra.
Libra, yeah.
And then it was changed to Luca.
Changed to Luca. Initially known as the world's first Bitcoin tax calculator, now one of the world's largest blockchain data companies. He left and co-founded Nifty's, known for developing and selling digital collectibles for Warner Brothers and Sony until his recent sale to MoonPay. And then, go ahead.
Thank God.
Thank God. Currently, you're a co-founder of Monix Labs, a software holding company that has developed 2 no-code platforms so individuals and organizations can build legitimate peer-to-peer businesses. Aspen, a comprehensive suite of applications for digital memberships. And you got to pronounce it for me. Subscribo? Subscribo, which can be described as DocuSign with a blockchain backend. In terms of existing project work, Jeremy is focused on music and real-world asset tokenization. So we started off thinking about this particular panel from the idea of how are we going to where we're going, and how did we get here? And I came out of a company called Control Data. It was me and 80,000 of my closest friends, and we invented technologies like hypertext markup language and texting. And it was absolutely amazing. What happened is, as we split and we changed and we became different companies, we saw the advent of new technologies that we didn't anticipate. And I liken what's happening right now with blockchain to what we saw at the very beginning of the dot-com boom. We had transmission control protocols and internet protocols, TCP/IP, was the language of geeks. And when it became accessible to the average person through the utilization of HTTP and other protocols, it suddenly became easy to share documents and whole new industries became possible. And then the barrier to entry started to change. The first credit card that was used in general commerce was the Diners Club in 1950. That first year, this cardboard, it was made out of cardboard. It had 10,000 users. It was accepted at 38 restaurants, and it was accepted at 2 hotels. In 1973, the first electronic transaction system was introduced via the Visa Data Network Center in California, and in 1980, electronic credit card readers were becoming common. 1999 witnessed the first credit cards with computer chips called the American Express Blue. Just 73 years from going from a cardboard card till today, we've been using these payment systems as promises of payment. We're now moving to peer-to-peer transactions that are completely outside of the US control of the monetary system. Payments that don't even use traditional exchanges are now not even clearing on the US dollar. Today we're going to be talking to JD and Brandon about what comes next, what it means legally and technically, and finally what's over the horizon. So after all of that, can you tell us where you think the payments are going and how Bitcoin will change commerce? And then what does AI have to do with all this?
Yeah, I would love to start with the AI side just to bridge the previous conversation to this and get it right into what we're going to talk about. So in a future world, it's going to be inevitable that we have our own little personal assistant, our own autonomous AI agent. It's a generalist AI that we ask to do our basic tasks. Cancel our Netflix subscription, buy a flight for our vacation, re-architect the notes from the Zoom call, many other things like this. And in that world, that autonomous AI agent will need to work with other autonomous AI agents. It will have to provision resources, compute, storage, bandwidth, or hire another niche AI agent that might be really good at some narrow task, but your general AI commissions them to do that work. And so in that world, money will be required for that agent to do its work. To put some numbers on it, right now they estimate around 36 cents per ChatGPT request, and there's many of those. So the compute cost is very high. And this type of commerce is going to be done over the internet, of course, and it has to be done in a way that suits these agents. So could the dollar serve as the money for this AI? And I think the answer is clearly no. The dollar is a credit-based system, which means we need to know the identification of the person sending the payment. Are we going to give our AI agents an ID? Are they going to be known actors? Probably not. They're going to need instant settlement. When you ask your AI agent to do something, it has to compute that immediately, which means settlement has to occur immediately. The dollar takes days, weeks, or months to settle. That's not a good thing. There's a long list of these things, so I would propose that Bitcoin over the Lightning Network is the appropriate money for AI agents. The reason is there's no identity required, it's totally permissionless, it's peer-to-peer, it's cash finality immediately. It's handing a piece of paper or an ounce of gold to your friend, the transaction's done. Other reasons like that, global, instant, et cetera. So I see that world, and we're going to talk about some of those things and what Lightning Network does and other forms of commerce on the internet today. So we'll start with that.
Thoughts on this?
That was killer.
Yeah.
I'm not adding anything.
So do you think, in your opinion, from what you've seen, is Bitcoin going to change commerce, or is commerce going to change Bitcoin? As far as and we can use Bitcoin or we can use any other type of a token. Which one is going to drive the changes in our industries?
Let this guy go again.
I'm the token Bitcoiner on the panel,
Yeah,
guys.
for
so-
sure.
Okay, so let's do a quick time check. Who owns Bitcoin? Excellent. Okay, that's easy. We don't have to go down that road. All right, let's start with just a framework that I think will help us break this stuff down. I'd like to propose that money is done in layers. Okay, there's a base layer money. We mentioned the hand $1 bill or an ounce of gold, final settlement. At the macro scale, that might be central bank deposits, gold, Forex reserves, things like, or physical money. And then layers on top of that would be our commercial bank deposits. We have a relationship with a bank. Maybe on top of that, we have a Venmo, PayPal, Visa. Right, those are separate layers. Each layer serves a different function. This evolved naturally over time as we expanded our needs in commerce. And so many people say Bitcoin's too slow. It can't serve as money because it only processes 5 transactions a second. That's true. But you'd be comparing a layer 3 money, Visa, to a layer 1 money, Bitcoin. So not a good comparison. You'd be more appropriate to compare Bitcoin to the SWIFT network, where central banks trade and settle internationally. So in that type of world, Bitcoin actually settles very similar volumes as SWIFT does today, which is shocking. Same order of magnitude. SWIFT's ahead, but not for long. And so let's think about layered money, Bitcoin, and then we have the Lightning Network that would serve as a similar layer to Visa in terms of speed and ease of use. However, it also retains the value of Bitcoin's base layer or physical money in the sense it has instant final cash settlement. Very important. You make a Lightning transaction, it's the same as me handing a $1 bill. I don't have access to it anymore. Unlike Visa, which may take days, weeks, or months, which puts a lot of stress on small businesses, managing cash flow, they're more fragile, et cetera. And so I'll make one concrete prediction looking ahead, which is that the payment networks we use today, whether it's Visa or the fintechs like Cash App, Venmo, et cetera, they're going to be totally obsoleted from a tech stack perspective. I'm not saying the companies will disappear, but they will rip and replace the Visa network, the PayPal network, et cetera, because those networks of banks have extremely high fixed costs, slow settlement time, and a whole bunch of other little problems that add up to a very costly transaction. And so rather than paying banks, waiting for settlement, chargeback risk, et cetera, which again gets all passed on to us as the consumer, we will use Lightning Network transactions, where you can go from dollars transition to Lightning Network into pesos within a millisecond or two, about maybe 100 milliseconds. So essentially instantly. So that's cross-border around the world for anyone with an internet access, and that also means when we go buy our coffee, on the back end, it'll just be like swiping a card or a QR code, but instead of going through the Visa network, it'll go through the Lightning Network. We won't even know, but that's amazing efficiency across the whole stack.
Excellent. So JD, looking at the music industry, and that's an area that you've been paying attention to and working in, what's happening in that space, and then how is Commerce on Change changing those relationships?
Yeah, so music is a $31 billion industry, very, very centralized, sort of. There's a handful of organizations that control a majority of the revenue within that value chain. But what the reality is facts on the ground is you have just each individual band is its own business. And so I'm a business process guy. So the way that I kind of look at the world is I look at a business process. And I was an SAP guy way back in the day. And essentially the way that I think about it is that there's a series of transactions that happen between a person that creates something and a person that buys it. And really what you're trying to do with all the technology frameworks that we're talking about today, Lightning being, from a payments perspective, is you're trying to remove the interfaces that exist between parties within a value chain, and you're trying to bring those together. And of course, the most optimal state is peer-to-peer because you have nothing in between you, the creator, and then the person that is the buyer. And ultimately what happens is as you have industries mature, what ends up happening is you have people that get lodged in between these value chains and then start to rent seek. And they do that by withholding information and data from different people within the value chain. And it is the withholding of that information that gives them their monopoly. And this is essentially what you see with pretty much all of the very large record label companies and all of the social networks that bands use to try to get access to fans. And so within the music industry, there's lots of different use cases for using distributed decentralized tech. The one that I think is quite interesting is if you're a musician and you go out and you're playing in front of a band or you're playing in front of a group of people, almost in no cases do you know who you're actually playing for. You don't even have a clue who your fans are. And the reason is because over time you've lost control of your data. What's happened is you used to, if you wanted to be a fan club of, like, say, Nirvana, because I'm a 90s guy, you'd either write a letter or send an email, and then you're in their fan club. And then they knew who you were, they knew how all your data, and then there was this direct relationship. But what ended up happening was Facebook came along, all of the bands moved over to Facebook because all of the consumers started to aggregate in those places, and then Facebook started to control the identity associated with the fans. And so ultimately what happened is then the bands went back to Facebook and said, yo, man, give me my data. And Facebook said, oh, man, consumer protection, can't give it to you. I can give you anonymized and aggregated data. I can tell you all the, 40-sums that live in Minneapolis that are fans of Nirvana, but I can't tell you that it's JD. And so what does that mean? That means that when you're constructing new solutions in the music industry, you have to create them in such a way that they collapse and remove the rent seekers that sit in the middle. Words that we used to use are central authorities, banks, big record labels, those sorts of things. And so what you do is you create a way for the musician to gain the identity data of the fan, and then they can build a direct relationship with that fan, and then they can change the value chain. And so how do you do that? Well, we do it with posters. So when you go to a show, you don't want to buy a poster because you don't want to spill beer on it, right? So what do you do? And the band doesn't want to print it up and carry it and transport and all of the costs associated with that upfront cost. What you do is you just put a QR code. Fan walks up, bangs the QR code. Then the transaction's executed on the consumer's device. It's not on the point of sale system that is in the venue. Once it's executed on the consumer's device, now the band can collect name, email, shipping address. You're drop shipping the poster, by the way. Mm-hmm. And then credit card information, and then wallet address. That's a 360 of the consumer. Now the band can never be deplatformed, And going forward, their marketing costs fall to the floor because they can actually see who buys their stuff. And so this is a very sort of concrete way. And of course, where's all the blockchain-y stuff? In this case, when you buy the physical poster, you also get a digital poster, right? Now, people may, I'm not going to argue with people's perspectives on NFTs and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't have to go there with it. But some people actually value a digital poster because the digital poster can also be a coupon. It can be a backstage pass. It can be just about anything you want it to be. It's digital. So you give people a digital poster, you give them a physical poster, they know you, you know them. Now you can interact, marketing costs come down. The people in the middle, their value or their ability to gatekeep is removed, and you've collapsed your value chain peer-to-peer. That is the fundamental way that you monetize like blockchain tech. So there's theory, and then there's the stuff that happens on the ground. I'm a revenue dude that, I think about what happens on the ground.
Yeah, so, one of the things that we look at is, FOMO, the fear of missing out. Those of you who are not here right now watching the video of it, you wish you were here. And so there's ways that we can help to establish the I was there. One of those technologies is proof of physical presence. Do you see, and we'll call it POP, do you see POP being part of this infrastructure for music? How do you see it being used alongside the digital currency side?
Well, look, being able to prove that you were at a place and then have an asset that reflects that attendance has value. If somebody, I remember when I was in college, I was at like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Green Day concert in State College in 1991. And I bet you, if you had a digital ticket stub that represented that, and there was only provably so many of them, say 5,000 of them, for collectors, that has real value. It also has like real flex value to you and your friends. You'd be like, yo, man, here's the poster. I was there. And when you put that on social media, that is the currency that gives you props and gets likes, which has its own type of value. So, being able to prove that you are at a different place isn't just the value that it has for you. It has a value in our culture, and so I absolutely feel like that's going to be a thing. It's a thing today, except for just people are used to like collecting the physicals. I think you're going to be collecting the physicals, of course, and the digitals that go with it, and then the ability to sell it in the secondary market and be able to have a payback of some of the royalties associated with those sales going forward is a primary component to those types of business models. And, that's another dimension of sort of the financialization of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to add something here. First, SAP guy, Oracle guy, we're next to each other, but
that's right.
It's old history. We're okay now.
Coke, Pepsi.
That's right.
That's right. And for you, Donald, I want to bring this to essentially the value for value conversation. What you're talking about is going directly to your consumer, skipping middleman, very important for you musicians. It's also broadly important for the internet as a whole. Right now, we don't have an accepted native currency in the internet. However, in the 90s, people like Donald were building this, and they actually built an error code, and you can fact check me, an error code for payment failed, which is a native internet payment failure. We don't use it today because we can't.
I don't remember the RFC, but I remember it.
It exists. And so I'm proposing Bitcoin is our native currency of the internet. And in a world where that is true, the whole architecture of how we monetize the web can change. And I think it will, be for the good. And so we built the internet right now based on advertising. Everywhere you go, it's ads. We use little ad blockers. We try to avoid it. It's everywhere. It's not only annoying, it comes at a very high cost, which is that in order to appropriately advertise on the internet, you have to know who your audience is, which means you need to slurp up every little piece of data we've ever leaked anywhere. Massive industry, all the smartest people in our world went to making those technologies better, and then we make them more addictive on the social networks. And I think that's a bunch of wasted capital, to be honest. And I think the internet would be better off if us as consumers went directly to the content creators that we like, and we have a direct relationship with them. Currently, we don't have an ability to do micropayments on the internet, so we sort of couldn't do that. Like, you're not going to pay $5 to read an article, but maybe you would pay 5 cents, right? And with Bitcoin through Lightning Network, you can actually achieve transactions that low. Someone sold digital art for 0.0, maybe like 10 zeros, 3. So whatever that is, a millionth or 100 millionth of a penny or something like that. And so we can do this today, and if that is true, you can go directly to your fans, you can go directly to your readers, and monetize that way. We can totally skip the surveillance net, totally skip advertising. Or maybe there'll be 2 competing networks, if I want to be conservative about it.
So specifically on, you mentioned currency, and do you think that blockchain is going to change the face of currency? And if so, how is it going to change?
Yeah, I honestly believe that Bitcoin will be the primary currency on the internet. It's hard for us to appreciate that as Americans. Our money works great, Visa works great. Inflation's low enough where we barely notice it, maybe with the exception of the last few years. However, abroad, that's not the case. There are many countries with double or triple digit inflation, and you go to those countries, you don't have to pitch them why Bitcoin matters. You tell them about it and they say, how do I get that? Right? If you're in Argentina, you've had a new currency every generation, so this is a real pain for you. We also see countries with capital controls or some sort of authoritarianism. Those are the countries that adopt the highest. And so if you go look country by country, it's highly correlated to bad money, bad government, Bitcoin's up. We're the opposite in the US, of course. We have that exorbitant privilege. However, I don't think that will be the case forever. I just think that Americans will be slower to realize this because our currency is the best among the fiats. And that's how I would frame that. And I think we have a upcoming battle here, actually, which is that the currencies as we know it are coming to their end state. And I'm not saying this as a doomer, this is historical. Very frequently in the past, we've changed currencies, and there's no reason to believe that would change. We can go to 1944, we went to the Bretton Woods system, 71, we left that and went to the fiat system or petrodollar system. We're coming to another period where the cracks are starting to show, global order is fraying, the dollar hegemony is weakening, and so in that multipolar fraying world, there is a vacuum created, and that leaves an opportunity for an upstart competitor type system. I think the 2 primary players today would be central bank digital currencies. That's what our lovely leaders would like. And then we have the people's money on the other hand, which is Bitcoin. And I think that's the proper fight. One more thing. And central bank digital currencies are a state's dream. It's the best surveillance. It's the best control system imaginable. In a period of coming chaos, that's really valuable to a government. I don't blame them for seeking that. However, it's too powerful for any individual to control. So it's my belief that we need to avoid that outcome and instead produce an emergent bottom-up money that is Bitcoin, which actually serves as a restraint mechanism. If your country is printing too much or not respecting the wishes of the individuals, the people will sell their dollars and buy Bitcoin, and that hurts the state. And so it brings more of a symbiotic power relationship between state and people. I think that's good it's obviously good for us, but I think it's actually good for the health of a nation too. It creates competition and forces a little bit of restraint, and in that world, markets are healthier, we produce more value, everyone's happy.
JD?
I was just going to say I'm less sort of like religious about it and more sort of like in an AI machine-to-machine world, we're going to need to be able to have microtransactions at scale. There's just a cost to execute transactions, in our society, and whether it's 2 cents or 5 cents or whatever the heck it is, it's just too high. Machine to machine at scale needs to be micro, and the U.S. dollar in its current form doesn't allow that to occur. And so I just kind of feel like, everybody talks about, large dollar transactions on Bitcoin and all of the different things. I just think you're just looking at the wrong side of the spectrum. If you look down at the micro side, you just realize that the fixed costs associated with maintaining that system are too high relative to the scale that the opportunity presents. So I just think Bitcoin wins in that kind of a world.
Got it. And so at this point, we're going to start opening it up. We had one question in the back.
Given the incentives to making shit coins and tokens, why wouldn't they just make a ChatGPT token that you would pay for with your credit card, and then it just gets used up over time? I mean, I love using Lightning, don't get me wrong. I would prefer to see it done with Bitcoin. Are they really going to do that, or are they going to make their shit coin on Solana and make their ChatGPT Solana token?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a fair question. I think shitcoin obviously is in the congressional record, if you guys didn't know that, so it is a legally appropriate term in this context. Please look that up. Patrick McHenry, shout out. So yes, right now what's happening is companies are choosing to issue a token, and the reason they do that is because they can get their payday on day one before they find product market fit. So by and large, I think it's more of a corporate thing in this fog of war as we sort of figure out what all this stuff is. I think that will mostly die off, I think for good reason. So in the world with ChatGPT, I don't expect Sam Altman to act altruistically, no matter what he says on the internet. And so I don't think that's happening. But I think in a more mature AI world where we're consuming these services, I think there'll be a plurality of options. And I think generally speaking, the dominant money or the settlement layer on the internet will be with Bitcoin. But it doesn't mean there won't be silos here and there doing little experiments. I just think that the lion's share will go to the open, global, neutral network that the whole world can use, where it doesn't matter where you live, anyone builds on it, it helps everyone else. So Jack Dorsey builds on the Bitcoin network, people in El Salvador's money gets better, right? And over time, that free and open source model has shown to outcompete the legacy model, and I think that will play out here in money as well.
Anything?
It's killer. I agree.
Fantastic. You had a question here.
Yeah, I've just heard over time, especially with a lot of the OG Bitcoiners and Bitcoin maximalists, the Lightning Network is just an attack vector on Bitcoin, and that it will be unwound by true nodes in the future. Obviously, we don't believe that. How can we be sure that the Lightning Network won't be unwound and that accounts that start with 3 are valid accounts on the blockchain?
Yeah, I think for those who don't know, Lightning Network is a layer 2 technology. If Lightning Network breaks and we throw it away tomorrow, there's no impact on Bitcoin itself. And so I see a world where there'll be many versions of layer 2, layer 3, sidechain, et cetera. We're going to extend the functionality. And to go one step backwards, Bitcoin is a money, it's a currency, BTC the asset. It's also a settlement network. Transactions are made and put into the ledger. It's also a peer-to-peer network. It also interfaces with the energy markets. And so it is many different things depending on what you look at. Concerns with the Lightning Network, I think, are valid. There are many, by the way. It's a very new technology proposed, let's say, 5 years ago, gaining a little bit of steam now. My personal opinion on it is it's not the thing I thought it was, but it's still going to be valuable. I thought it was going to be as is peer-to-peer internet money that no one can stop anywhere. But the technicalities of how this network's built is that most likely it'll be more of like you give some trust to a company or a network. So maybe you trust Visa to handle your small transactions. Maybe you don't need self-sovereign money when you buy coffee. Maybe you do in a situation when you're expressing political speech or buying something in another context, or you're living under an authoritarian regime. And so, yeah, I think the concerns are valid. I think we'll keep building on it. There's tons of innovation coming to Bitcoin, so valid concerns, not existential.
And then
So-
we had, okay, sorry, you go here.
All right, thank you. So I just want to talk about getting from point A to point B, or maybe it's A to Z. And really from the perspective of the United States as an example, but just the regulators, right? We've proven we'll confiscate gold with Executive Order 6102. Now we can say, well, how do you confiscate Bitcoin? But we've proven we'll go to war to protect the petrodollar system. You know, we'll go to the lengths of the earth to protect our existing legacy system, and that includes disinformation. So we can't count on the masses being aware of what's actually taking place behind the scenes. So how do you see us getting from here to there in that battle with the legacy system?
Yeah, really good question. And if you guys are paying attention, Bitcoin ETF news is catching all the headlines, but what's happening? FinCEN is sneaking some of the nastiest proposed legislation I've ever seen through. It's on par with BSA, Patriot Act, et cetera. It essentially is so general that any type of Bitcoin transaction would now be illegal. My personal stance is we should get rid of all these unelected agencies that somehow press laws through and somehow get consensus globally to follow suit. I think that's insane. Anyways, that's the context we're in. So there will be shots taken. On the other hand, we have people like Emmer and many other elected officials who feel strongly that we should have competition in money and we should have Bitcoin to succeed. And similar to the internet in the 90s, there was a fight over, well, child pornography, gambling, bad stuff versus let's let innovation succeed and see what happens. And they took a do no harm approach. It's my hope we'll do something similar here. However, I think there's much more on the line. So I think it's going to be a much greater fight than the internet was. However, if we look at the U.S. interest, which part of the U.S. are we referencing? Are we talking about let's say, the elite that cares about controlling the world and money and the American empire? And in that context, Bitcoin's very bad because the weapon is a tool that they use to leverage and attack countries with sanctions, et cetera. Or are we talking about the American people and the proper American values? In that situation, I would say Bitcoin actually is a very, very positive thing for Americans. First of all, we own the majority of it. The majority of the mining's here. So if Bitcoin's more accepted, America's more wealthy. That's good. That's more tax receipts, more future innovation. On the other hand, since, let's say, the 70s, but even prior, we've had a monetary regime. The way we set it up, you guys probably know the Triffin's dilemma. We essentially export inflation, we export our jobs because we find low-cost labor, let's say China. They produce all the goods and they ship it back to us. The net effect is our middle class is gone, we don't make anything. Instead, we financialize our economy. So we went from about 10% of the GDP coming from finance to 22, 23% today in the last 50 years. That's insane. That's not real value. In a time where we're maybe knocking on World War III's door, it's kind of a bummer that we don't have a manufacturing base here that hamstrings us in a time of conflict. And so the long story short is, I think that Bitcoin succeeding helps the heartland, it helps the middle class, it helps in a world where we're deglobalizing, reshoring, trade more with Mexico, trade less with China. I think that's the path the world's going on now. It won't be forever, but that's the way the pendulum's swinging. So it's my hope that cooler heads will prevail in that context. But my honest truth is they won't. And so what does that mean? It means we have to build things that can't stop. And that's the whole point of Bitcoin. That's the whole point of Satoshi's ideology. That's the whole point of the early Bitcoiners is we can either try to change the process by voting harder, or we can build systems that make the old systems obsolete, to steal a Bucky Fuller quote, of course. And I think that's our honest chance or honest path to win here. It's still an uphill fight, but it's gathering momentum every day. Trust in institutions is at an 80-year low. People are wondering what's going on, and they're starting to look for answers. And the answers are becoming more clear. The army's building, and I think we have a good shot here.
What I have seen is that there are a few organizations that are talking to the U.S. government about tokenizing Bitcoin. So even though Bitcoin is a token, they would create another token that would represent Bitcoin. That token would be able to transact in the U.S. banking system under the current rules. Don't have any view of whether or not that has a chance of succeeding, but you asked how do we get from A to Z. I think this is the government's natural response to its inability to stop it natively, but also the lack of desire to outlaw it for lots of other reasons. And so is there a way to bring it into the banking system by tokenizing it, and then you can use Bitcoin, but you have to use it within, a framework that exists today. So I think that that's probably going to be the easy button for a politician to say, I'm pro-Bitcoin, I'm pro the dollar, I'm pro the banking system, I'm pro, all of those things. I think that's naturally what we'll see over like the next 24 to 36 months.
Great argument, terrifying.
I mean,
Terrifying.
I'm not making a stance as to like the logic of this thinking, but I'm just saying like there's already been a significant amount of capital that's been deployed in the current system, political and real, and so like, they're going to try to use it.
Sir.
So interesting then the sort of moral implication of suggesting Bitcoin be the internet currency when it's a finite resource and there's been enough time for a dwindling supply to be continuing to dwindle and a global population of at least internet users that is growing. How do you set up the structure that is socioeconomically just and moral.
Yep.
Because it seems like that would just set in place structures that we're actively combating now in Web3 as a whole, trying to dismantle this sort of financial hierarchy and concentration of wealth.
Yeah, fair question. A couple ways to approach this. First, there's two stages to this Bitcoin thing, if it is what I think it is. The first stage is the monetization stage. We're going from zero to whatever some sort of an equilibrium is on the market cap of this asset. The people who, in that stage, the people who buy the asset early, they're taking a risk, they're rewarded for their risk. There'll be many very wealthy people, there already are, there will be more. Then there's a stage where we're at some sort of a maturity. It is what it is, society accepts it up to this level. Now this is a tool that anyone in the world can use. And in that type of situation, you live in a country that doesn't have access to modern banking services, you don't have access to a way to preserve your capital. Bitcoin's a tool for you, adding insane value from you immediately, whether or not you wrote it up and gained purchasing power along the way. And so those two stages, at the end state, everyone wins. At the rising value stage, the people who take risk early outperform. That's the case with any asset over any time. I don't think we should strive for a world of equality. That doesn't make sense. We should strive for a world of equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome. So in that type of world, Bitcoin is a fair money. The rules are fair for every individual. The Bitcoin system does not know who's interacting with it. We're all the same. However, in a dollar-based system, in a political money system, there's multiple tiers. We don't get preferential treatment. However, large capital allocators can borrow money at zero cost. They can get bailed out. We pay the bill, right? So we're going from an unfair system to a fair system, and there's no way around winners and losers on the appreciation phase, just like picking Facebook stock early or any other investment over time.
Hey, you kind of mentioned over here. Hey, guys. You kind of mentioned the CBDC versus Bitcoin, sort of, it's going to go one way or another. Now, when it comes to CBDC, the idea is that you would have an account at the central bank, so the Fed would offer an account, but that sort of cuts out the commercial banks from the whole transaction. So how do you see, what is the attitude of the commercial bank towards CBDC, and how do you see a commercial bank sort of interacting with this as we go forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's many different proposed versions of a central bank digital currency. They're popping up all over the place. The U.S. is flirting with it. It looks like Christine Lagarde said they're going to probably go forward with it sooner than later. It's a real problem if you have an app that's fed money, direct relationship with the central bank, instead of having a depository relationship with your U.S. bank or whatever. Then all of a sudden the deposits leave the commercial banks lend less, they all blow up. That's not going to work out. So it's my guess that the U.S. is keenly aware of that. Of course they are. And so we will have a different solution here that maybe marshals the commercial banks in a way that keeps them around. I don't see a world where we let the banks disappear. But it's an open question. It's a good question. I'm not fully up to date on the architecture.
Hey, JD.
I had a friend of mine who has a thesis that this entire narrative is around diversifying the memberships within the banking cartel to include big tech. So if you can allow people like Amazon and Microsoft and others to have accounts at the Fed, then you have diversified your membership base. And you have, given yourself options that, banks can't really be able to, deal with because they're under such, a high degree of regulatory scrutiny and within those frameworks. And so by partnering with big tech, you're sort of giving yourself more optionality in terms of how you present money to consumers through businesses that already are absolutely, utterly monopolies under any, definition of the word. And so, I think it's probably the biggest risk. Like, I wouldn't be a shareholder in big banks, not for anything other than I think that they're going to end up having to compete with Amazon and Walmart. And I don't know about Target per se, but I think they're going to end up having to compete with big tech, and they're just going to be too slow because of the regulatory frameworks that they sit under. But that's the thesis. I don't know whether or not that's actually the case, but that's what some smart dudes thinking.
I think it's an expedient approach, right? The fintechs already have the client relationships. You just add another asset there, but that asset is a pass-through to the Fed account.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Sir?
JD, you mentioned it'd be cool to have your address. You could prove you were at some concert, 20 years ago. I got one of those ENS addresses from Ethereum, with my name, and it's turned out to be a real pain because I found out all my transactions go to this thing, and they know who it is, and it turns out I was on Arbitrum, and some people contacted me out of the blue and said, hey, you had this address, it got an airdrop. Anyway, all sorts of people knew that I was making these transactions, and then they could trace those transactions to other. Anyway, it turned out having a known address for a long time just opens up all sorts of data that you probably don't want to share. Have you thought about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, first off, these are new systems, and there's a variety of sub-processes that wrap around a core transaction, GRC being one of them, governance, risk, and compliance. And the ability to hide identities is obviously a dimension of this that needs improvement over time. Now, what I would say is, for certain use cases, there's a high degree of desire from, or not desire, consumers are willing to share certain pieces of information. I mean, just go out and look at somebody's Instagram account. So being able to say that here's an address that has a whole series of digital collectibles, has one definite risk profile, whether or not you want to tie that to, how you're spending your pay stub is a different question. But, I think the way that I would articulate it is it's early. These are known risks, and the types of transactions that we're focused on are transactions that, when you put them up against the type of information that consumers are willing to share on social network, is actually less, not more. But yeah, it's 100% valid.
Quick comment on that. On-chain privacy is horrible. Don't do illegal things with your coins. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'd also say, I own JeremyDrane.eth, and I maybe used it for one day, and then I was like, oh, that's stupid. I mean, it was stupid in the context of who I am, the type of work that I do, people watching me, people, they do watch. And so it's not necessarily the right thing for me because of the systems that I have access to and the people and the things that I do. But for Joe consumer or Jill consumer that has, that just wants to have a whole series of digital collectibles that show that, hey man, I was at, Red Rocks in 1997. Yeah, I mean, your risk profile's, pretty low.
Well, we heard somebody had 22 visits to Burning Man earlier.
Yeah, that ain't me.
That ain't me. We got here, sir.
Yeah, so I was just coming back from a couple comments ago about your idea about the CBDCs, but as well the recent SEC battles over getting a Bitcoin spot ETF and Bitcoin as a token. And to me, at least, that seems like the global elite that you were talking about, you so dislike, just taking Bitcoin, using it as an asset class to increase their own wealth. And I guess I'm curious about comments on that, but also how do we differentiate between a real Bitcoin and a ledger entry on State Street or BlackRock's systems that will be used to prop up their own asset wealth management going forward?
Yeah, good question. It's a real risk, right? Bitcoin started as an internet curiosity, and now it's being totally financialized. On one side, you hold the asset, the number is going to go up from that. On the downside, the state is going to try to neuter it. The recent FinCEN, I think, is just a shot to start the argument, which is that they're saying zero privacy whatsoever. Essentially, you can't self-custody. I think that's a very horrible outcome, but it's a very real risk. I think there's no way to entirely stop it. Code is free speech, as demonstrated in the 90s. I think that will be upheld. I think money is also free speech. I think that will also be upheld. But what if that's 1% or less of the volume on the internet? of Bitcoin's total volume, in which case you use it when you really, really, really need it, and you take the risk for doing so, but day to day, we're totally surveilled. I think that's a real outcome that could happen. I hope it doesn't happen. We have to build, don't vote harder. That's our only way out of that. In terms of how will we tell the difference, that one's easy. My node rejects transactions that don't follow consensus. So as long as you're actually using the Bitcoin protocol, it's black and white. However, to the average person, perception is reality. That's where the fight actually is. The average person sees a number on a screen, it says Bitcoin, they don't know or care. And so that's where the risk is.
Yeah,
Really quick to follow up. How do we vote harder when FinCEN can make us felons and we can no longer vote?
Yeah, I actually advise against voting harder. I use it sarcastically as something that doesn't work. But with FinCEN specifically, apparently they're required to respond to our submission. So I work for a Bitcoin brokerage. Our legal team is crafting a response right now as we speak. I hope everyone else in the industry does the same. Absolutely bury them in paperwork and make good, respectful arguments. We should do that also. It's not an either or, to be fair. I say it tongue in cheek. We should fight the system through the official ways and build things they can't stop.
The spot ETF risk is that BlackRock and others accumulate enough Bitcoin that they then fork it, and then they say, if you want to do Bitcoin in the U.S., that you have to use this chain. 90-some% of consumers wouldn't know the difference between, say, a native or original OG Bitcoin and something that, BlackRock says is a Bitcoin. And I think that that's functionally that's realistically where the risk lies. I don't think anybody's going to be like, Bitcoin goes away. The question is what is Bitcoin? And I think, if in fact financial entities can get together with a big enough stake, and then they have the ability maybe to push through custodial wallets, those sorts of second order effects, then I think that the original Bitcoin has some real risk vectors. But I think that ultimately there's probably been a lot of conversation about that behind the scenes, and they're probably lining that up. And when they release these ETFs, they're doing it in a coordinated fashion.
Okay, do we have time for one more?
Can I just do a 30-second follow-up there?
Oh, yeah.
100% true. If BlackRock owns some majority of the coins, there's real risk of a fork, and the economic majority is in their hands. You essentially delegate your vote to BlackRock. Not a good idea. Luckily, the vast majority, somewhere between 60 and 80% of the coins, are held in some sort of self-custody relationship, and that's primarily due to the fact that they were released a long time ago by technologically savvy, ideologically driven people. So back to that, we release the coins exponentially. In this case, it's a very good thing because ideologically people hold them in their own self-custody, which makes these sort of custody attacks much harder.
That was going to kind of be my question. If BlackRock is able to fork Bitcoin, I think there are a lot of players outside the U.S. that want to have the old Bitcoin be the world's reserve currency. Is there a counterbalance threat? That threat isn't the right word. A counterbalance there to be considered?
Yeah, I think he just said it. Is a majority of Bitcoin is self-custodied. So whether that's Adam Back or some dude or lady that lives in Taiwan or wherever. So there's a counterbalance, but I think generally speaking, what will easily happen is the banks will accumulate enough. There'll be a legal framework that comes over that only allows people to transact in Bitcoin under certain scenarios. And then if Bitcoin doesn't quite do what governments want it to do, they'll at some point in time maybe feel like they've got enough control that they can fork it and do something different. I think that's the primary vector. Everybody knows it, and I think everybody's trying to counterbalance against that.
Yeah, one thing to watch here is which nation states are accumulating Bitcoin and who's mining. And in this case, I would be acting against the empire by saying, I hope countries outside the U.S. take an active stake. I hope they mine. I hope they custody it. Even nations that we might say are untasteful today. I think that brings balance to the force when we have non-aligned nations contributing here, to your point. If they do fork it, I will be glad to sell my BlackRock dividend, just like I sold all the other dividends from forks.
So maybe the reserve currency can become midichlorian. All right,
Exactly.
so we'll wrap up with this one. JD, we'll start with you. What advice do you have as we wrap this up? What do you have for the audience?
So I've been in the space for 10 years, and surviving in this space has been rough. I mean, I should have just bought Bitcoin and been a ski instructor. I mean, shit, if I had done that, I mean, I'd own like half of Vail or Aspen or something by now. But no, I think the way that I think about the world is I look at business processes, and I constantly look at like, you know, a full value chain. And, you know, here's the person that creates, and here's the person that buys, and what are all the things in the middle. And if you take that approach, you can see where the inefficiencies are, you can see the interfaces, you can see the central authorities, and then just simply look at this technology framework and push that down and see how that collapse, and then, you know, create businesses or invest in businesses that are making the value chain smaller. And, you know, whether that's, you know, for the legal students who left, but, you know, if I were in their shoes, I would take that approach, because that's the strategic kind of thinking that people are willing to pay lawyers for. Like, it's not the rote forms kind of work that used to happen back in the day. Like, nobody cares about that. It is the strategic thinking about it. It is seeing around the corner and having a point of view. And I think that that's, you know, nobody in this room, nobody knows what the future's to hold. But if you take a very disciplined approach in terms of looking at business processes, applying technical frameworks, removing interfaces, that kind of framework will allow you to have a point of view that's actually relevant, intelligent, and something that people can actually invest in. And for people that are in the business of providing service, you know, it is people that come to you with that kind of thought process that you actually hire. And at least that's the kind of people that I hire. So, you know, I mean, to the law students, maybe if they watch this, you know, do that kind of work and you'll be very successful.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing on practical, one thing on the philosophical. So on the practical side, if you're interested in Bitcoin, just set up an automatic recurring buy. It's $50 a week, it's $1,000 a month, whatever fits in your budget. Stack it every day, every week, every month. Don't think about it, don't sell it. Learn more as you go. Ideally, you self-custody that as soon as possible, but don't rush it. That's just the practical. And forget about it, wait 10 years, and then buy Vail. Or maybe a smaller resort now, that's a little less upside than 10 years ago.
That's right.
On the philosophical side, I would say a little bit of a call to arms here. I would say that we're in a period of dramatic change around the world. This happens every so often. The last time was, let's say, between 1929 to 1945. In that period, we had the great market collapse in 1929. We had a horrible period in the 30s. We expanded government in new ways, Social Security, unemployment insurance. And then we had the Bretton Woods system, World War II, UN, World Bank, IMF. These are tectonic shifts. America was reinvented, everything changed. And right before that happened, you would expect linear change like our simple minds do. But in this case, we're going through a period, let's say over the next decade, where everything is going to be reimagined. How Americans are treated by their government, what type of money we use, what's the geopolitical order, these things are all in flux right now. So I would say now is the time to pay attention, because the next decade could dictate the next 100 years. I'm obviously passionate about Bitcoin here. I think it's the right time for Bitcoin, so timing is good. I think it's the right solution. I think most people don't appreciate it in the big context. I think most people think magic internet money or scams or whatever. But I think this thing has the power to totally re-architect society in a more fair way, in a way that leverages the power of markets for good. And it's also a restraint on governments. It will, if you care about the environmental narrative, and there's lots to care about there, this will actually slow down unnecessary growth. Debt-based money pulls demand forward. We buy things we don't need today, and we'll figure it out later. And we're essentially mortgaging our grandchildren's future today. Bitcoin sort of turns that thing around in a way where growth would be sustainable, there'd be less debt in the system, and you would buy things you need and invest more on an equity basis rather than a debt basis. So if all this is true, this is tectonic society shifts. Even if it's partially true, you won't recognize the world in 10 years. So my advice there is to pay attention, get involved in things you care about, learn, and then also don't get caught up on this doom scrolling on the internet. Build real friends, have a proper relationship, raise a family, have kids. All that stuff is actually what matters. But if you want a bigger purpose, I think get involved here.
Please.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank everybody for coming. One, thank you for taking the time. Number two is I live in St. Paul. So I moved back from New York. So anybody that wants to have chats about any of this stuff, just hit me up. Like, I live for this. So Jeremy Drane is my Twitter, so I think that's somewhere. But DM me, whatever, and then let's chat. Love to talk anything crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum. Like, I love it all.
What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, same here. Thanks, guys. If you want to buy Bitcoin, there's a little corporate chill. Swan.com, buy some Bitcoin. If you do a /Quittem, my last name at the end, and sign up, you'll get $10 free. So if you don't have any Bitcoin, just create an account. It takes 10 minutes. $10 free Bitcoin, no strings attached. Twitter's the best. Quittem. You can Google my name. You'll find my website or me. Love to chat.
Yeah, and thank you, everybody. My name is Donald Raleigh. You can follow me on Twitter at Donald Raleigh. Thank you all very much for your time.